Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Modern Software Management. Find me on the web at modsoftman.com and on YouTube at the channel name at modsoftman. So today I want to talk about my experience with big companies versus small companies. It's advice people often ask me is, where's it better to work? Is it better to work for a big company or is it better to work for a smaller company? So I can't answer that question for you completely, but I can certainly give you my experience about how that goes. These are not industry standard terms by any means. I just made them up. This mid-size company, this is where I really have spent most of my career, and I really enjoy the mid-size. Although I have done some startup type stuff in tiny companies. I've worked for small companies that have grown, and I've worked mainly though in mid-size. I've either grown into a mid-sized company or worked at a mid-sized company. And then there are like big companies and very big companies, and very big companies where they're making more than $1 billion a year in revenues. They have, way more sometimes than 5,000 employees. I worked at IBM. IBM, I think, has about 300,000 employees. So I have some experience on the very big side. This is the typical organization of a mid-sized company. This executive team here, it's led by the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, and the CEO is generally a member of the board of directors. And in every board meeting, and these board meetings happen, once a quarter at least, he'll haul along the CFO to give an update, and depending on the topic, they'll bring in one or the other of the various other executives. The board, of course, represents the interests of whoever the shareholders are. And for most mid-sized software companies, they're going to be privately held, which means they're not traded on an exchange. The directors are appointed by the biggest shareholders, either are the biggest shareholders or are appointed by the biggest shareholders. And they are obliged to look out for the shareholders' interests. The executive team here is called the management team. They might have some stock in the company. They will often have stock options in the company. So in my case, I was often the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. What I really enjoy about a company like this, I have a voice on the executive team. You're not only playing the role of your functional leader. That's not the only hat you have. You also have a hat being overall responsible for the conduct of the company as part of this team. I'm well aware of everything that's going on. I know why decisions are made. Sometimes I don't always agree with them, but I know why they're being made that way. I can give my 2 cents in at the highest level of decision making. And I also have exposure to the board of directors. I will always know the board of directors. I will know each of them on the board. I will have chatted with them, spoken to them, gone to some parties with them, attended board meetings from time to time. So I understand where the board is coming from. I understand the concerns of the rest of the executive team, and I can bring that and translate that down to the tech team, and I can represent the tech team. And generally in a company this size, we're all very much focused on market success. You need to be successful in the market. You need to build the revenues for your product while paying attention to your costs. You have visibility to all of the numbers. You understand what moves those numbers, and you can act accordingly on your technical team. So of course, this is a great place. I consider this a great place to be. But let's now contrast this with a large company. So here's a very, very big company. At IBM, I was one of these VPs down here. I had a team of around, it varied, but it was around 200 or so people. So about double the size as I usually have on my mid-sized software company. But they'll be like, if this is a cohesive group of developers all working in one product area, mine was risk, one product area, there's about 300 groups like that across, and there's 300 or more VPs in tech at my level. So you are in a very tiny position down here. You do not have a full appreciation of what all of these people are thinking of. Moreover, the structure is super complicated by the fact that you have business unit executives. So our risk business unit, I dotted line into the executive in charge of that business unit, but I solid lined right up on the technical side. Plus, you have countries as well. So I was, for instance, reporting into Canada, My actual report was, I think, the head of HR in our business unit, who also happened to be Canadian. So it gave me a reporting path into Canada as well. So there's these country executives that cross through, the business units that cross through, then the functional areas that cut through it all. So it gets very, very complicated, as you can imagine. And there's all sorts of split allegiances that you have to have. The general way that, the CEO, the board, the exec team, they have to steer this giant ship. Like, imagine like an oil tanker, and the oil tanker is chunking along, and now you need to turn it. So you take your levers and you start turning it. Of course, it doesn't turn right away. It keeps going straight, and very gradually it starts bending and bending and bending. And what they use to steer the ship are the levers. The levers, the CFO, like who gets funded and who doesn't get funded. And then closely related to that is the HR department, who is allowed to hire, who's not allowed to hire, who's allowed to get compensation increase, who's not, at what levels, how are those distributed. So funny things start happening in a company like that. There's some dysfunctions that happen in that your success as an executive is not necessarily tied to how your products do in the marketplace. I mean, ideally, yeah, if your products do fantastic in the marketplace, that puts you in a good position. First of all, it's very hard sometimes to even tell if you're doing well in the marketplace because they've overlaid global marketing costs, global sales costs, global HR costs. And so they have these all sorts of costs they layer on every business unit, and it's hard to tell if you're profitable or unprofitable. And the way your stuff is sold, there may be global sales teams in different countries, and you're one of thousands of things they may sell. So global services are involved as well. So it gets like really complicated. How do you allocate the revenue to various things? Often big customers will sign enterprise license agreements that gives them access to all sorts of software. And then there's a huge fight over which business unit gets credit for which percentage of all of that. So it's actually very even difficult finding out. You're scratching your head at the business unit. Well, are we making money or are we losing money? I don't know. And even if you're being very successful in the market by your own standards, it may not be strategic for the company. And that's an important consideration as well, because you're allocating a certain amount of capital to conducting that little business. But meanwhile, you're not working on those things that may be more strategic to the future of the business. And so ultimately, it's an inefficient allocation of resources on that business unit. So if it's hard for anyone to tell, well, how are people successful and how do they get ahead? It's a little Darwinian, right? You can imagine that the people who make their way to the top of an organization like that, the skill that they're most selected for is the ability to make their way to the top of an organization like this. That sounds tautological, but it's very true. There's certain skills that are required for you to navigate up a huge executive hierarchy like this and make it to the top. Very little of them have to do with being, radically successful in market in many big companies. What do you have to be good at? You have to be great at politics. You have to hitch your wagon to the right people. And if that person is falling out of favor, you have to jump to a different wagon that you want to hitch yourself to. If there's a directive from the top that says, everyone now needs to focus on this, well, you better start focusing on that. So AI, natural language understanding is the latest, greatest thing. I want every business unit to be working on AI. So if you're the odd business unit out that isn't working on AI, you're in trouble. Your executive is in trouble. But if you can get in there and make a lot of noise early on and say, no, I've got this AI project, it's going to be great, it's working on this, you get, pats on the head, that's great. Unfortunately, what often happens is those projects might not have a real market justification for doing it. And eventually that project may not be successful in market. But by that time, the executive who pushed it, due to their success, they moved on, and not necessarily even in that same line of business. And then when the thing crashes and dies, it's someone else's fault. It's a hot potato game to get rid of this stinky project. You want to be there when it's being created and everyone's excited by it, and you want to jump off it when it looks like reality is about to hit and this thing won't do well in the marketplace, or maybe even technically well. So these are some of the problems that afflict large companies that you don't see in small companies. So in a company like this, everything is so visible, everything is so straightforward. What success is quite clear to everybody. But here you might have 200 people busting their butts, working hard as anything, just to learn that the whole thing is going to be canceled or sold off. The other thing, dysfunction you have in an organization like that is these big central levers that are pulled. When you pull one of these big finance levers, and in public companies, this is done routinely. Every Q3 it starts, every Q4 it tightens down, in Q1 and Q2 it loosens up again. They say, we're not going to hit our targets that we told the market, the public markets, we would hit. So spending, all discretionary spending, dial down. All new hiring, dial down. What if someone quits? Doesn't matter. It's all dial down. Well, it's an essential person who quit. Make do. Okay, but it's like a super important position. We only have one of them. We're going to die if we don't do it. So we can make an exception, right? No, exceptions are extremely difficult. The way they set it up, a new hire has to be approved at like this level up here, like way up here at this level. Okay, you're way down here at this level, and you need to hire someone down here. So you go to your boss. Your boss says, okay, I'll maybe talk to my boss about it. You go to this guy. It's like, no, it's like he's not going to bring your tiny little concern up another level because he doesn't want this guy to have to bring it up another level to this guy where you can actually override the decision. So you get dumb things happening as a result of these big global levers being pulled that are by no means locally optimal in any sense whatsoever, because the decision making is artificially set to be so high. People like this are dealing with multi-million-dollar issues. You've got an issue that's going to cost the company $1 million down here. Doesn't even hit the radar. Does not even hit the radar. So those are some of the sorts of dysfunctions you see in large companies. And does it affect the developer at the bottom? Yeah, you bet it affects the developer at the bottom. Their team is suddenly shrunken and they can't do any more. A team wants to travel to meet the team that they're working with. Even if it's like a car drive and a Motel 6 stay. Nope, not allowed to. Sorry. And you want an exception? No. You have to go too high up to get an exception. It's not worth it anymore. Nobody brings it up. It's not always clear what the right thing is, especially for a giant software company where you need to steer the ship like Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, going like all in virtual reality. And I'm sure he's telling every team, it's got to be, whatever you're doing, it's got to have a virtual reality application. And some teams are saying, that makes no sense for me. But it makes sense globally in Zuckerberg's mind because he thinks the future is VR and he wants to steer that giant tanker in the direction of virtual reality, right? May or may not pay off. But if it does pay off, there'll be a lot of little teams that had to do a lot of stupid things and had to do a lot of sucking up to get the company to move in that direction. And is that a bad thing? So hard to tell. But it certainly is a little soul crushing if you're down there on the bottom and you have to do something that makes no sense at all. Unfortunately, like they'll do a lot of things that don't have any success in the market in order to get a few that do. But heck, that's the way startups work as well. And in these smaller companies, you're never caught on the wrong side of something like that. Now, you might be caught in a company that isn't in a successful market. But, as in my role as CTO, I feel like I have a lot of say over that. It would be my miss if that happens, and I should suffer the consequences, the pain of that happening. Because it's a smaller company, everyone has a little bit of that feeling. This developer is talking to me whenever they want to. Certainly these directors are, and the VPs, of course, all the time. So, and I share with them as freely as I can. So we all feel like a part of a big team. The pay is generally you'll be making less cash compensation if you're working for a company like this. If you're working as a VP, you'll make more guaranteed risk-free cash compensation. Comp is usually composed of your base salary plus a bonus Plus, in a big company like this, there's usually restricted stock units that are given to you on a regular basis. And as soon as those vest after several years, you can sell those stocks become yours. It's a publicly traded company, so you can sell those right away if you want to. And so that combination. And so on the other hand, a company like this, you'll have options. And if your company is sold, you get your options paid out. So you might have to wait 3 or 4 or 5 years for the payout to happen. But when it does happen, it's a relatively big payout and it's usually taxed very well too. So it's taxed in a way similar to a capital gain. It's not a capital gain in Canada. It's called employee stock option benefit, but it's only half taxed. You get in cash $1 million. That's like $2 million in salary. But on the other hand, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. And you might have to wait a very long time. You might have to wait 10 years, or you might leave before that happens. In my later career, I joined a number of companies around this size. I'm looking for a really solid company. I understand what their business is. I understand where the growth is coming from. I understand it's a good business. It's already quite well established. It's clear it's going to grow. I think I can come in and help with that. I think I can help make it grow more efficiently and more smoothly. So that's, the first thing I'm looking for. Is there a fit from that point of view? I, of course, look for a fit with all my fellow executives. I don't mind so much if I have a fit, quote unquote, with my own tech team. I'm going to shape them in the image that I want them shaped in. So it's, people are surprised when they say, oh, are you concerned about how it's set up? No, not at all. Like 0%. Much more concerned with my executive team and my feeling from the board of directors and how committed they are to the company. I also look at what is the stock option plan. How many stock options is very important, of course. What percentage of the company that translates into? What is my strike price? What is the eventual sale price likely to be? How long is that going to take? Is everyone motivated to make that happen within a certain amount of time? And then I look for the details of the plan. Is it aligned? Are people on the board? Are they going to do well at the same time as the exec team does well, at the same time that everyone down the tech team has options? Is everyone aligned and that we're all aiming for the same financial outcome? In terms of what happens after one of these mid-sized companies is sold, and should you stay or should you leave at that point? Usually for the first couple of years, nothing much changes because it takes a long time to integrate companies and get them all set up. And that might persist because there's two kinds of buyers you might have. What's called a strategic buyer, what's called a financial buyer. So a strategic buyer is a big company that buys you because your company looks to be a strategic fit with their company. They say, yeah, we're expanding into this area. We'd like to buy a company to get a jump start in that area. So that's the strategic. The other kind is the financial buyer. So the financial buyer just basically wants to keep your company running the way it is, but it thinks it's going to be a great success. So it buys it from the current owners. Current owners make out like bandits. They built the company up to a certain level, and then a financial buyer comes in and takes it off their hands and hopes to grow it again. And they then will hope to sell it after 4 or 5 years. They borrow money at a relatively higher interest rate because it's risky, and they add in some extra cash of the investors in the private equity firm as well. So you got a big chunk that's borrowed, and then a chunk that's new capital. Then as the company grows, of course, all the growth in value is attributed to that extra part. So if it grows by only that much, you've still doubled your money. Or they're generally aiming for a triple of their money, whereas the loan grows only like at the rate of the interest rate. So it's a relatively smaller growth. So that's all fine and dandy, except if the company revenues start tailing off and it starts threatening the repayment of those loans, in which case you have to start firing people. And so you may be like a very profitable company, generating tons and tons of profit. And then a PE firm says, great, we'll use that profit to fund a loan that's going to pay for most of the company. So you get bought and you think, oh, goody, we're going to get all this money that we've been saving up because we wanted to show a lot of profitability so that you'd buy us at a high multiple. More realistically, so they can do what they're doing, borrow money against your high profit. And you think, all this profit will be freed up. We can reinvest it in the business and really grow like crazy. No, it doesn't work that way. A lot of that profit gets eaten up just repaying the loan, and you said, "Oh, I can grow a little bit," but only so long as the revenue top line keeps growing, because they're quite free with in the first year. Say if it's a 5-year run, they're quite free with any money above that line, above that loan repayment line. So yeah, go nuts, reinvest early on. Later on, 3 years later, they might shut that down a little. They want you to show more profitability, but earlier on, they'll like take the fetters off, but they don't take the fetters off the way you would really hope. So it's interesting that the private equity firms, they're not really investing in your company in the most ideal sense, in the sense, that an angel investor takes their money and puts it in and says, here, take this money and spend it all, and I expect you to do well. They don't do that. A lot of it is a loan, and so you don't have as much money to grow the company as you might have thought you did. And as you get exchanged between multiple private equity firms, there's less and less of that. And it's a bit of musical chairs, who's caught holding the bag when the revenue growth stops. And now you can't pay the loan off anymore, and then it spirals down again. So those are some dangers in the private equity market. Now, of course, with the strategic buyer, one of the issues is that the executive who really pushes to purchase your company may be gone, and you may languish. They might not want to fund you at all. And like I say, you might not even be able to fund yourself from your own profit of your own business, because, as I said, it's very difficult to assess how much profit you're making once they overlay everything else on top of you, all the global costs on top of you, and do all these allocations and things like that. And so they might just let you languish and might sell you off at a bargain rate if there's no real champion inside the strategic any longer. That actually happened to one of my companies. We were about to be bought by a big corporation, and we decided to take it more into the market to see if we could get a better price. They were fine with that. Absolutely, you should do that. Turns out by the time we got around to it, that was the best offer, but the executive had left the company, and so nobody else was there who wanted to buy us in that company. So we had to terminate that round, and later on we sold it again. And in my case, as the top exec in software, I become like a big fish who's well compensated with options. My options get paid out. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much for that. But then they'll generally match the base and the bonus, and then throw you some RSUs that do not nearly make up for the options. So basically, you're taking a big pay cut. And, maybe the thinking is, well, hey, the options are highly unlikely to pay out. Only 1 in 10 companies make it. I never thought along those lines. My success rate was almost 100%. If I chose a company, I chose it carefully, and we sold it. So I consider I have a skill at choosing those companies. And so my success rate is 100%. And so there was no risk. The only risk was the amount of the payout. But even at the low end, it was way more comp than I could get after I joined the strategic. And of course, you explain that to them and you work it out with them. In one of the times I was acquired, I had most of my comp when I was hired into the smaller company was bonus. So actually, it was like 50% was my bonus. So I had my base salary, which was relatively low. And then I had my bonus, which was the same as my base salary, basically. So 100% of base salary was my bonus. It's entirely at the CEO's discretion. I was comfortable taking that because I knew I could knock it out of the park. And I really trusted the CEO. And at the end of my first year and the second year, I've always got 100% of my bonus. So now we get bought by this other company. And the other company says, his bonus is like out of whack. It's out of whack with everyone at the same level in this giant company. Everyone at that level, no one gets a bonus like that. So we're going to need him to join our bonus regime for people at that level. And the bonus was like 30% of the salary. So, okay, so you think they'd raise the base, but they didn't. They didn't raise the base because the base was already too high for them, or, the base was kind of appropriate for someone at that level. So they lowered my comp. Now, they're not allowed to do that, right? That's a constructive dismissal. You're essentially fired if they do that. So I remember the CEO, as the deal was coming through, and they wanted the execs to sign these new employment agreements. And he came to me and said, Dave, there's good news and there's bad news. Okay, well, hit me up with the bad news first. Well, the bad news is they want you to sign this. So he gives me the letter. And I immediately went like the eyes beeline to, what's the base? What's the bonus? You know, I joined deliberately under market because the bonus, right? We agreed, as I know, he said he tried explaining it to them until he was blue in the face. And I believed him. I believed he did legitimately try to do that, explain it. Okay, so that's the bad news. Well, okay, well, that's pretty bad news. And okay, would you like the good news? Sure, what's the good news? Puts another piece of paper in front of me. Says, if this deal goes through, you get a signing bonus of equivalent to 1 year's compensation, basically. Oh, all right. And that doesn't come from the new company. That comes from the old owners. And so I say, well, I thank you very much. I'll take that. And then I happily signed my new executive deal. And I said, well, I'll get into it with the new owners after a few months, of this, and kind of explain how my comp is now lowered. And, but I'm I'm whole for the first year for sure, more than whole for the first year. And then the second year, I'll start negotiating. Anyways, I'm totally unable to negotiate with them because it's one of these big, giant companies with all these levels, and everyone I talked to sympathized, but nobody could do anything about it because the decision making was way up here, and by the time you got way up there, they barely knew you, and they said, whatever. So anyways, I had to leave that company, and I joined another mid-sized company, another smaller company, and kept. So just to sum it up, that mid-sized company, for me, that's the sweet spot. It's a big enough company to be interesting, a variety of things to do. You feel directly tied into the business. So that's my favorite place. Now, the giant company, you can actually bounce around easier. You can go from one area to another area, move within the company fairly freely. So there's a certain benefit in that. And you can, if you're good at climbing hierarchies, you can bounce up really high and get paid a lot of money potentially. It's not something I'm particularly good at. I don't consider it valuable for me to be good at that. I didn't like it. So I always stayed away. So that's why I prefer the mid-sized software company. And I always advise people, if it's me, that's what I would do. Anyways, thank you for your attention once again. Please click to subscribe and get notified. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next time.